Lysera moved through the crystalline halls of her family's palace, her boots clicking softly against the polished floor that reflected the twin suns' glow in shimmering streaks. The palace was alive with murmurs and flickering lights, a symphony of politics and ritual. Holographic banners projected her ancestors in mid-diplomacy, their eyes following her with an eerie intensity that made her feel like she was constantly being evaluated by long-dead relatives. Her ears twitched involuntarily, a subtle sign of her irritation, as she listened to the discussions about her impending marriage. Marriage. The word felt heavier than the gravitation fields that stabilized the palace's floating towers. Her family insisted this union was essential. Kale, the human warrior sent from the frontier worlds, was supposed to be the perfect symbol of alliance. Lysera, in contrast, was meant to be perfect in compliance, grace, and obedience, qualities she had never particularly excelled at when left unsupervised. "Perfect is boring," she muttered under her breath, flicking a strand of silver hair from her face. Her personal aide, a tiny levitating droid named Scrib, chirped indignantly, as if scolding her for using such an unladylike expression. Scrib had the annoying habit of offering commentary during private reflections. "Perhaps boring is an emotion you should not display in public, Lysera," it said in a mechanical, sarcastic tone. Lysera rolled her eyes and tapped the droid on its shiny casing, causing it to wobble slightly. The arrival of Kale had been delayed by a miscalculation in the interstellar travel route, a minor mishap that had caused a minor explosion in one of the frontier launch stations. Fortunately, nobody important was hurt. Kale finally arrived, stepping off the gravlift with a posture that suggested he had fought a dozen wars and won, though his uniform was slightly singed in an entirely different way than intended. Lysera watched him approach, curious despite herself. The human was tall, broad-shouldered, and undeniably clumsy in the courtly etiquette that defined Virelia's upper echelons. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if gravity itself had given him a playful push, and his boots left faint smudges of dust on the otherwise pristine floor. Their first meeting was predictably awkward. Lysera extended her hand with the elegance demanded of her station, only to have Kale stare at it for a moment, then clumsily bow, bumping his forehead slightly on her extended palm. Scrib whirred in alarm. "Initiating protocol." "Apology sequence," it squeaked. Kale laughed, a rich sound that echoed against the crystal walls. "Guess I should have practiced this in the mirror," he said, rubbing his forehead sheepishly. Lysera fought the urge to smirk, succeeding only partially as one corner of her mouth lifted. "Mirrors are overrated," she said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. They were led to a smaller chamber, ostensibly for private discussion, but it contained all the grandeur of an imperial hall compressed into a room barely large enough to contain their respective presence. Floating lights drifted lazily above their heads, changing color in response to ambient mood, a feature that often misfired and bathed the room in a greenish glow, indicating contentment that neither of them felt. Lysera tilted her head, the tips of her ears brushing a silver thread of the holographic map projected on the ceiling. "So, human warrior," she said, "how familiar are you with Virelian customs?" Kale glanced at the hovering projections, then at her, raising an eyebrow. "Well, I've got a vague idea that bowing, nodding, and not blowing anything up are the basics. Am I close?" Lysera could not help herself and laughed softly. The sound was melodic, carrying just enough mirth to make even the droid pause. "Close enough," she said, "though you may need to work on your pronouncing my name. Kale, you call me Lysera, not Lyserator or Lyseraphobia." Kale grinned, rubbing the back of his neck. "Lyserator has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" he joked. Lysera's ears twitched, a sign of a reluctant smile forming. The first sparks of connection, subtle and unspoken, flickered in that awkward dance of humor and irritation. Over the next few hours, they practiced etiquette, walked through ceremonial routines, and endured the stifling presence of palace advisors. Kale's attempts at formal bows frequently ended in him nearly toppling over holographic furniture, while Lysera's attempts at diplomacy sometimes involved subtly redirecting the conversation with sarcastic remarks about the impracticality of hovering cup holders. Scrib provided commentary at every turn, half critical, half entertaining, and sometimes completely wrong, often giving the pair a reason to share quiet laughter when no one else noticed. Lysera found herself observing Kale in moments she would have dismissed in any other context. The way he instinctively checked the stability of a floating platform before stepping on it, or how he gently nudged a small alien child out of the path of a levitating ceremonial drone, hinted at a character deeper than the blunt exterior presented to the palace. Kale, in turn, noticed her patience in guiding the confused advisors, her subtle rolling of eyes when she disagreed internally, and the grace in her body language that betrayed not just training but intelligence and self-possession. They were learning to navigate the strange territory of being thrown together as political pawns, discovering humor in the absurdity of the rituals and the unpredictable technology surrounding them. By late afternoon, they were walking through the palace gardens, a vast expanse of floating flora suspended in magnetic fields, where alien plants shimmered in shades unseen by human eyes and small, friendly insectoid drones hovered like metallic hummingbirds. Kale crouched to examine a peculiar luminescent flower. "Do these bite?" he asked with mock seriousness. Lysera raised an eyebrow. "No, but if you try to eat one, I cannot guarantee you won't turn purple for an hour." Kale grinned. "Sounds like a fair trade for interstellar sightseeing." They shared a brief laugh, the tension of political obligation momentarily easing under the sun's twin glow and the strange comfort of mutual ridiculousness. Evening approached and the palace lights shifted to a soft, violet glow, signaling the end of the day. Lysera and Kale returned to their chambers, weary yet strangely lighter from their shared experiences. Lysera watched him settle into a chair, noting the faint humor in the way he attempted to adapt to her world. The day had been long, filled with awkward introductions, near disasters, and bureaucratic absurdities, yet beneath it all, a small but undeniable curiosity had begun to grow. Kale looked at her, an unspoken question in his eyes, and she returned it with the tiniest of smiles, the long ears twitching unconsciously. Humor, she realized, might just be their secret weapon against a future neither of them had chosen but both had to face. As the twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the palace towers, Lysera allowed herself a brief, private thought. Perhaps being forced into this union was not the end of freedom, but the beginning of an unexpected journey. Kale, on the other hand, muttered something about how no one had warned him about alien etiquette being more dangerous than frontier combat, and Scrib whirred approvingly. The first day of an impossible alliance ended not with despair, but with the tentative, unsteady promise of companionship. The next morning, Lysera awoke to the faint hum of the palace's gravitic stabilizers vibrating through the floor, a gentle reminder that the palace itself was never truly at rest. She stretched, the movement sending her long ears flicking in irritation at the sound of Scrib's cheery voice. "Good morning, Lysera. Day 2 of political entanglement awaits. Shall I prepare a motivational hologram of your ancestors smiling approvingly?" "I'll pass," she muttered, rolling over and tugging the covers around her shoulders. "Last time I tried to sleep with motivational holograms, I woke up thinking my great-great-grandmother was judging me for not memorizing treaty clauses." Scrib tilted slightly in midair, a motion that looked like exaggerated disbelief. "Judgment is inevitable. Accept it gracefully, or I can project a small orchestra to accompany your protests." Lysera groaned but eventually swung her legs over the edge of the hovering bed, her feet brushing the polished floor. Today, the human warrior Kale was scheduled to accompany her on a tour of the outer palace gardens and the orbital training grounds. Kale, despite his clumsy diplomacy the previous day, had impressed her in subtle ways. She reminded herself that appearances could be deceiving, but humor, as she had already discovered, was an unexpectedly powerful tool. When Kale arrived, he looked every bit the frontier soldier, with a dust-streaked uniform and a faint scowl that suggested he had spent the night arguing with interstellar traffic regulations. "Morning," he said, scratching the back of his neck, which produced a small cloud of displaced hair and a faint trail of frontier dust. "You don't get any warning about these palace elevators. They move sideways and upside down and sometimes just pretend to be walls." Lysera hid a smile, watching his exaggerated gestures as he tested each elevator. "You call this a complaint? It's a form of entertainment. Watch carefully, the human attempts to defy gravity without falling." She leaned against the wall, her long ears flicking in amusement. Scrib chimed in, "Subject displays a high level of naivete. Probability of physical mishap, 78.3%. Kale glared at the droid. I'll have you know my people are very adaptable. Gravity just likes to keep me humble. Their first stop was the floating gardens, a labyrinth of magnetic flora that shifted subtly under their feet. Some plants hovered, some sang, and a few mischievously squirted luminescent sap when brushed. Kale reached for a flower that looked suspiciously like it might squirt something unpleasant, and Lysera's eyes narrowed. I'd avoid that one, she said lightly. It's territorial. Kale smirked. Territorial, you say? Sounds like my last roommate. Lysera's lips twitched in what almost qualified as a smile. Your last roommate, I'm curious. Was this roommate also equipped with tentacles or just bad habits? Mostly bad habits, he said, kneeling to examine another plant. Tentacles would have been easier to handle, at least I could predict their movements. Lysera laughed softly, her ears flicking with amusement. She realized she was enjoying his company more than she expected. His humor, though crude by Virelian standards, was oddly disarming. After navigating the gardens, they moved to the orbital training grounds, a sprawling platform where warriors practiced combat techniques in zero-gravity simulators. Kale's eyes lit up, a mixture of excitement and mild panic. I hope no one's going to make me do gymnastics, he muttered. Lysera raised an eyebrow. Why did your people skip physical education? He shrugged. We mostly focused on avoiding explosions and surviving asteroid collisions. Gymnastics wasn't high on the priority list. Lysera couldn't suppress a laugh. Even Kale's unpolished humor had a way of breaking the stiffness imposed by palace decorum. Scrib buzzed in, human humor detected. Probability of continued amusement, high. During training, Kale struggled with the zero-gravity combat simulators, flailing in spectacular ways that Lysera found difficult not to watch in delight. At one point, he collided with a holographic projection of a Virelian warrior and bounced backward, accidentally striking a nearby control panel. A holographic recording of Lysera's ancestors flared to life, shouting incomprehensible battle commands. See, Lysera said, trying to hide her laughter. Even the ancestors are alarmed. Kale rubbed his shoulder and grinned sheepishly. I'm charmingly efficient, aren't I? As the day progressed, they shared moments of genuine connection, punctuated by humor. Kale asked questions about her world, why the plants hummed, how the palace floated without collapsing, and why her people's long ears twitched so expressively. Lysera explained, sometimes with patience, sometimes with teasing exaggeration. It's how we communicate subtle emotions, she said, flicking her ears toward him. Mostly it's annoyance or boredom at humans thinking diplomacy is a sport. Kale leaned back, smirking. Good to know. I'll try not to offend your ears too much. By mid-afternoon, they were seated on a hovering terrace overlooking the neon-glimmering city below. The twin suns were low, painting the sky in shifting shades of violet and gold. Lysera felt a strange ease in Kale's presence. He was still a human from a frontier planet, rough around the edges and unpredictably bold, yet there was a sincerity to him that made her want to trust him. Kale, for his part, watched the city lights reflected in her eyes and noted, with a mixture of admiration and confusion, that she seemed lighter, more animated, and even occasionally amused by his bad jokes. The palace communication drones buzzed overhead, announcing trivial messages from advisors, but Kale waved them off. They can wait. I'm busy trying to survive alien gardens without becoming a bioluminescent snack. Lysera laughed aloud, a sound she hadn't allowed herself in public in years. Even Scrib seemed pleased, whirring with a faint, cheerful tune. Their journey back through the palace was interrupted by an unexpected malfunction in the gravity field over one of the corridors. Kale, demonstrating his battlefield reflexes, grabbed Lysera mid-fall just as the floor inverted beneath them. Lysera, shocked, blinked at him, her long ears flattened against her head. Impressive, she said dryly, though the corner of her mouth twitched in amusement. I suppose frontier training has some uses in palace emergencies. Kale smiled, holding her steady until the field normalized. Told you humans have practical applications, he said. Lysera shook her head, a laugh escaping before she could stop it. She realized she was beginning to rely on him in ways that had nothing to do with diplomacy or duty. By the evening, they returned to the palace chambers, exhausted but lighter from shared experiences. Lysera watched him settle into a chair, scribbling in what appeared to be a personal journal, muttering about zero-gravity combat and territorial flowers. She noted with a subtle flick of amusement that Kale's humor was no longer a distraction but a companionable rhythm, a bridge over the tension imposed by her family's expectations. Scrib, hovering near her shoulder, commented, "Subject appears increasingly charmed. Probability of emerging affection moderate." Lysera snorted. "Moderate, you say? Be careful, I might start agreeing with you." As night fell over the twin suns' fading glow, Lysera allowed herself a private thought. Perhaps this alliance, forced and improbable as it was, might lead not only to duty fulfilled but to something unexpected: friendship, understanding, or even a strange, unpredicted affection. Kale, meanwhile, was oblivious to her reflections, more concerned with writing notes about the palace's floating furniture and joking about the absurdity of interstellar etiquette. Their bond, born in awkwardness, humor, and mutual survival, had begun to grow in ways neither had anticipated, and the city of Vyrlia shimmered around them, a silent witness to the slow, intricate weaving of two very different lives. The morning of the ceremony arrived with a peculiar serenity. Twin suns hung low in the Vyrlian sky, casting long, fractured shadows across the crystal towers, making the entire city shimmer like liquid glass. Lysera adjusted the folds of her ceremonial robes, the fabric designed to react to her mood by subtly shifting color, an attempt at aesthetic subtlety she found entirely unnecessary. Her long ears twitched nervously, betraying the calm she tried to project. Scrib hovered nearby, projecting a miniature countdown timer for the ceremony, accompanied by a cheery, slightly sarcastic, "Only 3 hours, 42 minutes, and 16 seconds until your life is officially managed by someone else." "Cheer up." Lysera shot the droid a glare. "I'm more concerned about surviving the entourage without throwing myself into the nearest anti-gravity fountain." "Probability of fountain escape high," Scrib quipped, spinning lazily in midair. Kale arrived just as the palace attendants began assembling the ceremonial energy fields, which pulsed gently in synchronized patterns, casting kaleidoscopic lights across the walls. He looked every bit the frontier warrior, battered, unpolished, and utterly bewildered by the floating gowns and hovering furniture. Lysera caught him staring at a levitating tray of ceremonial refreshments, tilting his head. "Do we eat these or are they ornamental?" "They are both," Lysera said dryly. "Try one at your own peril." Kale grinned, picking up a tiny glowing orb that hummed faintly. As soon as he bit into it, it burst softly into a shower of luminescent sparks. "Delicious," he said, wiping a bit of glowing residue from his chin. Lysera blinked, momentarily speechless, then let a soft laugh escape. "You will make an unforgettable bridegroom, I think," she muttered, ears flicking in bemusement. The ceremonial chamber filled quickly. Diplomats, nobles, and advisors from both Vyrlia and the frontier worlds gathered, their robes reflecting light in a mesmerizing pattern. Holographic projections of past rulers spun gently in the air, narrating the importance of this alliance with dramatic flourish. Lysera felt the weight of centuries of expectation press down on her, yet beside her, Kale appeared oddly at ease. He whispered, "At least no one is trying to throw me into a ceremonial fountain yet." She shot him a sideways glance, then rolled her eyes, the corners of her mouth twitching. "Yet is the operative word," she said. The ceremony commenced, an intricate dance of light, plasma arcs, and levitating platforms. Lysera moved with practiced precision, though her mind wandered to Kale, who seemed simultaneously fascinated and bewildered. Scrib occasionally piped in commentary, noting Kale's missteps with ironic cheerfulness, which caused Lysera to chuckle quietly. Even in a ceremony meant to enforce duty, humor had carved a small space for life. Midway through the proceedings, alarms blared. Rogue drones, remnants of an opposition faction from the frontier worlds, attempted to disrupt the Union by buzzing erratically through the chamber. Kale immediately sprang into action, his battlefield instincts kicking in. He dodged the drones with surprising agility, pushing Lysera safely behind a hovering platform. She observed him, ears flat in concentration, and realized with a jolt that he moved with purpose, not because of duty alone, but because he genuinely wanted to protect her. Lysera's own reflexes, honed through years of diplomacy and subtle maneuvering, complemented Kale's physicality. She guided energy shields with precision, deflected a drone with a flick of her wrist, and countered a malfunctioning plasma arc that threatened the ceremonial projection of her ancestors. In the chaos, Kale quipped, "I knew marriage would be hazardous, but this is extreme." Lysera's lips twitched in amusement even as she directed the shields. Humor, absurd as it seemed in a battlefield context, anchored them both amidst the chaos. By the time the last drone was neutralized, the chamber was quiet, save for the hum of the energy fields and the relieved murmurs of the attendees. Lysera and Kale stood side by side, slightly singed, a little bruised but victorious. Scrib whirred approvingly, "Human and Virelian collaboration unexpectedly effective, probability of future success high." Kale, brushing luminescent dust from his uniform, glanced at Lysera. "So, teamwork seems to suit us," he said, a subtle smile tugging at his mouth. Lysera nodded, a genuine smile spreading across her face, her ears twitching in a motion of amusement and approval. "It appears so," she replied. For the first time, the weight of the political arrangement felt less like a shackle and more like a shared journey, one they could navigate together, with laughter as a secret weapon. The rest of the ceremony unfolded without incident. They completed the vows, words amplified through holographic channels so all could witness, yet the exchange between them carried an intimacy only they could sense. Duty was fulfilled, but an unspoken understanding had taken root. The alliance was no longer just political. It was personal, fragile but real, nurtured by shared danger, humor, and the recognition of each other's strengths. Afterward, as the guests departed, Lysera and Kale found themselves alone in a quiet terrace overlooking the neon-lit cityscape. Floating gardens shimmered below and distant ships streaked across the horizon like fireflies. Lysera, adjusting her ceremonial robes, finally allowed herself to speak freely. "I expected obligation, restraint, perhaps even resentment," she said, her ears flicking thoughtfully. "I did not expect this." Kale leaned casually against a railing, one boot hovering slightly above the platform. "This?" he asked. "You mean the accidental life-threatening drone attack?" She laughed, a light, airy sound that floated above the terrace. "No, this. The way you make it possible to think of duty as something bearable, even enjoyable." Kale tilted his head, considering her words. "I think it's easier when the other person doesn't glare at you constantly," he said with mock seriousness. Lysera's ears twitched in amusement. "I was merely trying not to throttle you for nearly stepping on my ceremonial robes." They shared a quiet laugh, the tension that had once bound them dissolving in small bursts of humor and understanding. Scrib hovered nearby, projecting a tiny display reading emotional bonds increasing at unexpected rates. Probability of romance, elevated. Lysera glanced at the droid, shook her head, and whispered, "Be quiet, you know nothing about subtlety." In the following days, the palace settled back into routine. Lysera's family gradually accepted Kale's presence, not because they understood him, but because they could not deny the bond forming between the two. Lysera, for her part, found herself changed. She had discovered that strength could coexist with vulnerability, that humor could be a shield as well as a sword, and that trust could emerge even in the most improbable circumstances. Kale, too, had grown, learning the intricate patterns of diplomacy, the nuances of alien social cues, and the joy of seeing a world so different from his own. Evenings were now spent exploring the palace together, joking at floating fountains, testing the limits of anti-gravity gardens, and teasing Scrib for its endless commentary. Lysera laughed more than she had in years, while Kale's jokes became less clumsy and more endearing, often eliciting genuine smiles rather than incredulous stares. They were no longer merely political pawns, they were companions, equal in wit, courage, and subtle affection. One night, as twin moons rose over Virelia, casting silver streaks across the palace, Lysera stood on a balcony with Kale. "You know," she said softly, "I never imagined I could care for a human warrior, and yet here I am." Kale smiled, nudging her gently with his shoulder. "Funny thing, I never imagined I'd be charmed by an alien princess who could probably bench press me if she wanted, but here we are." Lysera laughed, ears flicking in amusement, and together they watched the city shimmer beneath them. The alliance was complete, the marriage formalized, but more importantly, a bridge had been built, between species, between worlds, and between two hearts that had arrived unexpectedly at a shared understanding. Humor, courage, and the quiet recognition of each other's worth had transformed duty into something richer,